It's Kyle here, and I'm very excited to be reviewing the book I am today because it's basically almost like a book was created just for me to enjoy because it hits all my ideal interests. And that is The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire by Dr. Chris Kempshall. This is an amazing book that explores the history of the Star Wars universe. And there's been several books that have been written that kind of explore the history of Star Wars, but they're usually always written from our world's point of view, and either kind of exploring it from how it was created to how it's impacted just our culture, a variety of viewpoints of exploring Star Wars history. This book is looking at Star Wars history from the point of view of a historian who actually lives in the Star Wars universe. So it's so fascinating to kind of look at all the events that we know in Star Wars, but from the point of view of a historian who actually lives in that universe, and in a lot of cases grew up during a lot of these events. And as the historian reveals in this book, he actually joined the resistance and became a fighter. So it's such a fascinating book. It's so well written by Dr. Kempshall. And I think one reason is he actually is a really well-respected historian. He's one of the foremost experts on World War I history. So, he's a legit historian who also happens to be a huge Star Wars fan. So you just combine those two. It's like, hey, what if I was a historian living in the Star Wars universe, and how would I write about the Galactic Empire and its rise and its fall? And he does an amazing job. As I mentioned, this book is almost like it's crafted just for me because it hits so many of my main interests. I've always been a huge history nerd. I've loved history so much my entire life. Obviously a huge Star Wars fan. But then in college, my degree is actually in political science. And when I was reading this book, I was like, this book reminds me of so many books I had to read for a variety of classes in college. And honestly, I enjoy reading those types of books. I've continued reading those types of books throughout the rest of my life. So it hits all the little points that I think people enjoy reading nonfiction. They'll be like, oh, I love this so much. This is being written as a real history book. The little stuff like there's references that are being tagged, so there'll be next to a sentence there'll be like one go to bottom and it says what file and imperial records are being referenced in regard to this event and stuff like that. Little touches like that are fascinating. I love how this book is crafted in such a way that the historians are able to get around stuff that probably should be in this book, but in our own reality all the facts are not known yet. So, for example, the return of Thrawn that we saw at the beginning of in Ahsoka Season 1, obviously that's going to be a major event, but we don't really know what's going to happen. So how does this historian get around that? Because obviously he can't really write about this huge event in the history of the Star Wars universe. So he kind of makes allusions to Thrawn as one of the most studied and written about individuals in this era of Star Wars history, so that all the readers are so familiar with it, I'm not going to waste time going over those events. I'll just lightly touch on it. He's very vague about it. So it's a very clever workaround of, basically I don't know what happened, so I can't really write about this, so I'm just going to skip around it. Is very, very well thought out, because I was wondering, I wonder how he's going to get around some stuff that hasn't really been revealed yet that we're going to probably learn soon in the next few years in a variety of stuff like Andor and Ahsoka. And it was very clever how he did that. One of the parts of this book that I thought was the best done was exploring the Emperor's motivations versus the Empire's motivations. I thought this was a very clever point that this historian was making. And I should say in this book, this historian is actually kind of his expertise is in studying the history of the Sith and stuff. So he's one of the few people in the Star Wars universe he even alludes that even knows who the Sith are and stuff like that. So throughout the book, as he's exploring the creation of the Empire, how it was ruled, why it fell, he keeps on bringing up the point that the Emperor a lot of times had different goals and motivations than the rest of the Empire did. He was more focused on his goals as a Sith and not necessarily in the day-to-day operations of the Empire. So people working under him were kind of completely different goals. In a lot of cases, they didn't even really know that the Emperor was a Sith or what even a Sith meant. And I think that sometimes a lot of times we forget that, not every Star Destroyer captain really knew what the Emperor was up to. He just thought I'm just a power army that's kind of creating an empire. And what he thought the Empire's goals were completely different than what the Emperor's goals turned out to be. So I thought that was very interesting. I did also enjoy how the book explored how the rest of the Empire viewed Darth Vader. It was very fascinating because, in our world, we just be like, oh, Darth Vader is this amazing villain. He's such a cool character. Everybody's just obsessed with Darth Vader. But throughout this book, it talks about, all the Imperial structure is basically terrified of Vader. That, like, if you serve on his ship, he might kill you. He's constantly screwing up plans because he goes on these side missions. Like, he's obsessed with Luke Skywalker, so he divert Star Destroyers to chase them instead of, like, actually focusing on the main battle. So it's kind of interesting to look, the historian kind of going for, like, all these interviews with Imperials afterwards. Like, they all just thought, like, Darth Vader just kept on screwing stuff up. And I thought that was kind of a funny, but also a well thought out point that would be true. One point I do want to make with this book is not revealing new plot points for Star Wars. So if you're going this and, like, you feel like you're a huge expert in Star Wars and you're like, oh, they're going to reveal some hidden nuggets that hasn't been discussed before, this book doesn't do this. However, I will say, like, if you're somebody that, and it's really hard to consume all Star Wars content. So for me, like me, who doesn't really get into the comic books, there were elements that were referenced in here that were from the comic books that I'm vaguely familiar with because I've heard other people talk about it, but I don't really know them in much detail. And I got to learn a lot of them a lot more because they were explored in this book. I think that's one thing I'll salute this book for. It just didn't focus on, like, oh, here's the stuff that were in the movies and the TV shows, but we're going to ignore the books and the comic books and the video games. No, this explores everything. If it's official Star Wars canon, it's treated just as seriously. It doesn't matter if this was mentioned in a random book or in The Empire Strikes Back. It's treated the same way. It's like, no, this is actual real history. And, I lived in this universe and it's all the same to me. So I thought that was very well done. And I guess lastly, one other point I want to make this book that I thought was something I don't think I even really think about a whole lot. And it was very well explored in this book. Is that, I think a lot of people, after the new sequel trilogy came out, 7, 8, and 9, a lot of people got frustrated, like, oh, all the positives of what was accomplished after the Return of the Jedi was undone, so all the sacrifices by our heroes really were for nothing, and it all got undone, basically in episode 7, and then, it took 2 more episodes to kind of get back to where we were after Return of the Jedi. So did the original trilogy actually really, those heroes, they tried to do, did they actually accomplish anything? It ended up all being a complete filler. And in some ways it is, and the historian says, like, explores why did the New Republic fail? Why did the First Order was able to rise again? But one thing the historian also points out of view, we got 30 years of peace. And after the decades of brutal rule by the Empire, those 30 years of peace were bliss. Even though in the end the New Republic failed, and the historian definitely, we need to study more why did the Republic fail, so we don't allow fascism to rise again in this universe. But at the same time, we cannot take for granted that we got 30 years of peace. So all that fighting to overthrow the Empire, even if it only lasted 30 years, anybody that just went through this more recent war would give anything for 30 years of peace again. That was a very well made point that honestly I didn't really had thought of before, that those 30 years probably meant a lot to the people actually who lived it. So I'd say, like, if you're interested in kind of exploring history and the politics of Star Wars, if you typically enjoy nonfiction books, I think you'll really love this book. If you kind of like to explore Star Wars from a more serious point of view, you're going to enjoy this book. Like I say, like, if you enjoy Andor, this is a book you're probably going to really love a lot. If you're more into the fantasy side of Star Wars and, that side of it, and you don't really care about any of the more stuff about canon and the politics, if you find that type of stuff boring and the military engagements, this book is probably not for you. But, like, if you're really into, like, reading history books and you're also a Star Wars nerd, this is probably the perfect book for you, and I would highly recommend it. It's by far my favorite Star Wars book I've read this year, and honestly, maybe one of my favorite Star Wars books I've read in the past 5-10 years. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. So I definitely highly recommend The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire by Dr. Chris Kempshall. I do want to plug another book that the same author wrote, and that is The History and Politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy. And this book is actually written from our world's point of view. So it's that same historian, his same expertise as a historian, exploring Star Wars, but just from our world's point of view. So if you want to get that more perspective on Star Wars, highly recommend this book. Both books are amazing, and I really love them a lot. So let me know in the comment section below if you could have somebody from the Star Wars universe write about certain events in that universe from their own point of view, kind of like a history book, or maybe somebody write their own biography and we get to read it. What character would you like a biography about, or what event would you like a history book written about from the perspective of actually somebody who lives in the Star Wars universe? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button. If you have yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you the next time, and may the Force be with you.